All right, everybody, welcome back for our final debate here. It's MSP200, Communications and Ethics, and we are doing our final ethical debates. The topic today is First Amendment and free speech. On the right side of me, I have Leah and Mariana for the pro for, and on the left side, I have Anthony and Danny. Con against. Their arguments will focus on the limitations to free speech as a human right, also clarifying the First Amendment. Each team will start off with their opening arguments, okay? We'll have 6 minutes, and we're going to start with our pro-for side. And you're on the clock starting now.
So our first argument is that the First Amendment is effective in protecting the human right to freedom of expression, specifically freedom of speech. The First Amendment is what protects human rights in the United States and what makes it different, the United States different from other countries. As an additional provision to the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment's purpose is to protect people's God-given rights. It has been effectively fulfilling its purpose for the past 230 years. One example of this is the 1962 case of Edwards versus South Carolina. According to the History.com editors, on March 2nd, 1961, 187 black students marched from Zion Baptist Church to the South Carolina State House, where they were arrested and convicted of breaching the peace. The Supreme Court ruled an 8-1 decision to reverse the convictions, arguing that the state infringed on the free speech, free assembly, and freedom to petition of the students. The black students peacefully marching was offensive to certain people who had them arrested. However, arresting them and convicting them of any crime directly violated these students' First Amendment rights. So in this case, the First Amendment was the main legal citation used to reverse unjust convictions and successfully protect these students' ability to freely express their opinions. It is a human right to freely express one's belief without facing unjust punishment for doing so.
For our second argument, we argue that the First Amendment is also very clear in its intent and wording. It is almost impossible for the average and reasonable person to misunderstand the intentions and meaning of the First Amendment. We state that the First Amendment does not need to be changed or modified. The right to free expression is one of the most fundamental, since it is essential to the fight for the respect and promotion for all human rights. People are condemned to oppression without speaking freely, denouncing injustice and calling for change. An example case is the Mahoney Area School District versus Bill in 2021. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Pennsylvania high school officials lacked the authority to discipline a student for an off-campus negative snapshot post that she made in frustration after not making the varsity cheerleading squad. The highest judicial body has ruled that the school district violated the First Amendment rights, which protects the student freedom of expression. Something very common today. Generations change and more people express themselves through social media. People can also use the right to petition the government, to pressure the government, point out where it is breaking its law, and sue if an error has occurred. Respecting the freedom of others to say anything, no matter how offensive we may consider it, it is to respect our freedom of speech. Yeah.
All right, so we have 3 minutes. Our con team can ask the pro team any clarifying questions to their argument, and you're on the clock starting now.
Okay, so just to clarify, you guys believe that the First Amendment should have 0 limitations at all and should be 100% in every aspect be guaranteed freedom of speech?
Well, I think there already are laws in place limiting the First Amendment. Our argument is that it doesn't need to be changed any more than it is right now, and it doesn't need any more limitations than it already has. But we didn't state that clearly. So, but yeah, it already has limitations such as you can't defame someone, or commit libel against someone, and so, or threaten people. So I think that's what we already have in place is enough.
Okay.
Any other questions from the counter team? Okay.
I'm good. You got anything?
Questions?
Not that I am.
Okay. So now we move on to the Econ Team to present their introduction and arguments. And you have 6 minutes, and you're on the clock starting now.
The First Amendment guarantees freedoms concerning religion, expression, freedom of the press, assembly, and the right to petition. While the First Amendment does lots of great things for our country, its effectiveness in certain areas is questionable. As it currently stands, there are several forms of speech that courts have deemed are not protected by the First Amendment. Some of the areas not protected include obscenity, child pornography, defamation, perjury, and blackmail, among others. One area that's not touched upon in the First Amendment or by courts is what's considered hate speech. Hate speech can be defined as abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice against a particular group, especially on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation. The First Amendment makes no mention of hate speech, which often becomes an issue when hate speech arises in court cases. The vagueness of the First Amendment and its lack of clarity gives power to those spreading hate. Free speech should not be a right without limitations, and limitations regarding hate speech need to be added so the First Amendment can be effective and upheld in today's societal standards. According to ALA.org, the First Amendment requires the government to strictly protect robust debate on matters of public concern, even when such a debate dissolves into tasteful, offensive, or hateful speech that causes others to feel grief, anger, or fear. This overprotection of harmful and hateful words and actions only serves to harm the public. One case where this came up was in RAV versus St. Paul in 1992, when, according to David May, the Supreme Court ruled that a town couldn't make it a crime to place a burning cross or swastika in an attempt to arouse anger or force or alarm on the basis of race, color, creed, or religion. This is a clear example of where the First Amendment wasn't effective in upholding the standards of the world we live in. According to Richard Stengel, the First Amendment protects the thought that we hate, but it should not protect hateful speech that can cause violence by one group against another. This idea is especially true considering the world we live in, where everyone has a platform. It's easier than ever to spread ideas, both good and bad. A more recent case where the First Amendment's effectiveness was questionable was in Snyder versus Phelps 2011. As described by Tom Heed, Fred Phelps, who was a founder of a church in Kansas City, led his followers in picketing with homophobic signs at the funeral of a fallen soldier who was killed in Iraq. The family of the soldier sued for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Phelps and his followers based on existing U.S. hate speech precedent, stating that the church members had the right to be where they were. In this case, the First Amendment gave the power to the homophobic individuals attacking a deceased soldier. Out of all the limitations on the freedom of speech, this seems like it should be one of the most obvious limitations. According to Dan Boylan, the Campaign for Free Speech survey has found that 51% of Americans say the First Amendment should be rewritten, and 48% say that hate speech should be illegal. Furthermore, Dan Boylan pointed out that the percentages are even higher among millennials, where 57% say the First Amendment should be written to reflect the cultural norms of today, and 54% say an appropriate punishment for hate speech could be jail time. This clear cultural shift in ideology is reflective of the times we live in. America and the world is no longer in the late 1700s. It's time that the basic documents that detail our rights be updated to reflect the times we live in now.
Our second argument is that the First Amendment must be clarified with regard to freedom of the press. It should say the right of the people to receive information through the press free of opinion and judgment. The press must be held to a higher standard than it is currently provided by the First Amendment. Our reasoning is that the freedom of the speech right in the First Amendment refers to self-expression, which is an individual freedom. Freedom of the press is different from freedom of self-expression. An article by O'Neill in Ethics for Communication describes self-expression as often unclear and uncivil. Self-expression in the press negatively affects the public's trust in the free press. According to Farbro's magazine, 56% of Americans said they agreed with the following statement: journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. One example is Nicholas Sandmann, a Covington Catholic high school student who attended the March for Life rally in front of the Lincoln Memorial in January of 2019. A video of the event between Sandmann, his classmate, the Native American activist, and a group called the Black Israelites went viral. The press rushed to judgment and falsely reported what actually occurred. The news report by CNN proved to be wrong when more information through additional videos footage came to light. As a result of the false information provided to the public by prominent media organizations, Sandman's character was defamed, his life and his family was threatened and essentially ruined. In Ethics for Communication, O'Neill says, if powerful media organizations enjoy more or less unconditional rights of self-expression, they are likely to harm and injure. My second point is that a free press must ensure that information is not withheld from the American people to further an agenda. Unfortunately, there are numerous examples of the press withholding important news from the public. The most recent being the Hunter Biden laptop story. The American public depends on the press to inform them of news that affects their lives. However, the decision should not be governed by a corporate agenda, but instead just report the news. That is the definition of freedom of the press. It is not the role of the free press to be the moral police and decide what the American public should or should not know.
All right, now the pro team has 3 minutes to ask any clarifying questions, and you're on the clock starting now.
Do you have any right away? Mm-hmm. Do you have any right away? Okay. Start you, please. Okay. I have a question about what you said about like the press withholding information. Like, how do you ensure that someone's withholding information that the public needs to know? And I mean, how would you punish that?
Would you repeat that again?
So like if someone's withholding information from the public that they need to know, how do you ensure that? Like, how would the government ensure that without, like, I don't know, tapping into their private, into their privacy?
So I guess a clarifying question here that you're asking would be if the public, right, has information that is needed, right? How would government officials respond to that without tapping into their privacy? Got it?
Yeah. Sorry, that was a bug on my shoulder.
Yeah. So if the public has information that, or someone has information that the general public needs to know, right? How would the government go about tapping into that without invading their privacy?
Let me think.
That was your argument.
Well, let me just. Would you mind say that one more time? Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
If someone had information for the public, right, and the government, we need to know that information. How could the government tap into that information without invading someone's privacy?
Let me just think. You said the press or
anyone that has information that the general public needs to know. So it could be the press.
That's a bad question.
Well, the press does know. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Next
it was
question?
like
No
it was like a weird worded question. I was like,
we're trying to clarify. You got another clarifying question there that you all have?
So, Anthony was talking about the offensive speech and the hate speech, and what is offensive to one person is not offensive to another. So, who can truly define offensive speech?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we kind of have to go with like the generally accepted definition of hate speech is, whereas we find it. I had it somewhere in here. Whereas like, because if I find it, if it's like abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice, I think against a particular group. So like, I feel like if we can define like what it would be, you know what I mean? Like if it's like attacking a particular race, a particular sexual orientation, things of that manner. I think that's how we could like really specify like what would and wouldn't be allowed to be spoken towards people under the First Amendment.
All right,
Okay.
that's all we have time for in terms of the question. Let's move on to our counter argument / rebuttals. Remember, we are not presenting any new arguments during this time. We will start with our Pro 4 team, and you have 3 minutes on the clock, starting now.
All right.
Our Pro 4 team starts.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. No worries.
Okay. So, what people think and say could be uncomfortable, but free speech, the idea of having free speech in the First Amendment was never supposed to just create everyone feeling peaceful and happy. It's just meant to allow people, especially minorities, like minorities in an opinion, like a popular opinion, to exercise their human right to like express what they feel and think without fearing like the government being able to suppress or oppress them for it, or other people to legally be allowed to suppress or oppress them for it. And since people they differ so strongly on what defines hate speech, because like most people would agree that like racial slurs are hate speech, or yes, going against someone because of their gender or religion is hate speech. Not the government shouldn't be in charge of monitoring everything people say, because it's just part of free speech that people will be offended. And so this doesn't mean that people should say offensive things or say hateful things to other people, but as long as they're not specifically threatening them or threatening their reputation, then it's allowed under free speech, which, like I said, isn't always comfortable or pretty, but it's definitely necessary in order to allow everyone to be their unique individual without fear of being suppressed.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Individuals must be learn to be respectful in their actions and words, whether they disagree or agree with another person. The government will be overstepping in deciding boundaries of power if it were regulated every word that people speak. So we state like without the First Amendment, a few state that have to be changed or modified, people will still say whatever they think or whatever they want, which could still be spreading misinformation. So receiving the First Amendment won't change the spreading of misinformation. It would change anything in society. But at least we have our human rights. We have our freedom of expression. And that is something that many people have been fighting for a long time, to have their own rights and their own human rights. So if you take that from the people...
That's time. All right, let's move on over to the Econ Team. You have your counter argument / rebuttal, and you're on the clock, starting now.
Yeah, so obviously the freedom of speech is like a very important human right, and it's one that, like you said, is essential to, having like a well-balanced and a well-balanced nation. But at the same time, I don't think we can say that the First Amendment is very clear when, the First Amendment has largely had to be interpreted by courts in like various court cases over the last, 200 years, to the point where, the courts had to, include the obscenity, child pornography, defamation. They had to like kind of make those notes to the First Amendment because the First Amendment wasn't clear when it was written in the first place. And like, we don't think that the First Amendment needs to be, it definitely shouldn't be a right without limitations, because, like the courts already decided, obscenity, child pornography, defamation, speech that incites violence. The courts have already deemed that speech shouldn't be protected by the First Amendment. And furthermore, in terms with the hate speech, I don't think that we need that. I don't think that falls under freedom of expression, because that freedom of expression, is the ability to express your ideas. Even if they are controversial, yes. But like in some instances, I think it just crosses the line. The example where that I brought it before, where the man was where courts ruled that man was allowed to burn crosses and swastikas and on public grounds in 1992. I don't see how that really falls under freedom of expression. I feel like that's pretty clearly attacking specific people based on, things out of their control, race, religion, etc. So I think there's definitely a line that can be crossed, and that the freedom of speech should not be a 100%. You can say or do whatever you want. I think there definitely need to be limitations to ensure that we have a peaceful, well-run society.
Oh, you argue that there should be limitations to free speech, and free speech is a human right. However, free of the press is not free expression, which is the meaning of free speech.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right, so now we have our final 3 minutes. We are here at the concluding portion of the debate. Each team will have an opportunity to state why they felt their argument was the best. We're going to start over here with the Pro 4 team. You have 3 minutes and you're on the clock starting now.
Okay. So I think our argument is best because the First Amendment is clear in its intent and wording, and where it has failed, we have already made up for in laws so that the courts cannot, they can't abuse it, and that people cannot abuse it. They can only go so far with their freedom of speech. And the right to petition the government is within the First Amendment. And so I feel like it covers everything that's necessary: the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of religion, and and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And so I feel like it is complete with its other amending laws. And I think it's important because without being able to express ourselves fully in these ways, we would not be living up to our full potential.
Okay. We state that you can just remove it or not give people the right to express themselves, because it's not just hate of speech, it's the human rights and your rights of expression as an individual. So it is a human right that all people and religion deserve and should be kept that way. A world without a freedom of expression will be full of rules and laws where no one will have the right even to speak or express themselves. So we just estimate, even if yeah.
That's good.
Okay. All right, our Econ Team, you're on the clock with 3 minutes starting now.
We think that our argument was better because when you look at the First Amendment, it's extremely simple, and there's not much to it. It's only it's 2 lines. So we think that it's how can you say the First Amendment is clear when the courts have had to interpret it over hundreds of cases over the years, to the point where they had to add their own little amendments and changes to it to clarify stuff that the First Amendment didn't state in its original writing. And we're not saying that there shouldn't be freedom of expression, because we don't think that attacking people based on race, religion, I don't think that falls under freedom of expression. I think that's just blatant hate speech that I think most people would agree shouldn't be able to be spoken freely, especially in manners that might induce violence or might offend certain people. That doesn't fall under freedom of expression. So we think that freedom of speech is a right that should have its limitations, and the courts have agreed with that, stating that people can't incite violence, people can't you can't spread child pornography, that kind of stuff. But we still think that there needs to be expanded a little bit more when it comes to hate speech and then the dance points.
The First Amendment is the cornerstone of American freedom. The First Amendment protects our right to free speech and access to a free press, which is essential to the well-being of American citizens. However, the First Amendment is outdated and needed to be revised to fit today's America. The First Amendment must recognize that a free press does not mean free expression, which includes inserting options into the news and deciding what to share with the American public based on a corporate agenda.
All right, everybody, let's give it up for both sides one time. Now we enter our question and answer portion of the debate. We have 15 minutes setting up on the timer. If anyone in our virtual has a question, you can just post it in the chat. Anyone in our live audience, come on up to the mic and speak your piece.
All right, so I have basically the same actually the exact same question for both of you and how you would interpret it. So it ties into how do we differentiate rude speech that's not meant to be hateful from hate speech. So how do we differentiate hate speech from satire or comedy that is making fun of somebody in a rude way? What about when using language that is controversial and considered rude by some? Would it be hate speech to call COVID Kung Flu? What if I called my friend retarded after having to pay for their meal at a restaurant because he forgot his laptop? What about if someone uses a vulgar word to describe gay people, to describe their friend, and is not using it in a way to diminish those in same-sex relationships? What if a black man calls his friend the N-word? How does the First Amendment protect or not protect these examples? I'll start with you guys.
So I guess like I think where we could have made it a little bit clear, it's like obviously these words shouldn't just be like erased from the human language. Obviously, I think it kind of has to do more with like the actions that you say with the words. You know what I mean? So like with like some of the examples, like one of the examples I spoke about when like the people were like protesting the funeral of a dead soldier just because he was gay. I think like the actions that are going along with the words have a lot of weight. I think that is where like. I think that should be more like applicable in like court cases and stuff. Not as much as like, oh hey, I'm just calling you a slur just because you're my friend or whatever. I think it's more has to do with like the actions and like the hateful actions alongside the words. I think that's where I probably could have been more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also say that like it all depends on context and situation and opinion of the person you're talking to. You know, for example, some people would always be offended no matter who called them the N-word. So like that, it really depends on opinion, and that's why, I don't know, I feel like it would be very difficult for the government to define hate speech without just having it from one viewpoint, you know, because then not everyone can agree on what hate speech is, because it depends on people's personal opinions and the situation. And so like to just say it's hate speech, it's illegal and you can go to jail for it, then that's just like too much power on the government side. And like for like people should be respectful and definitely shouldn't be saying anything with the intent to harm anybody or offend anybody. But yeah, it's all just a matter of opinion, and I think that everybody has differing opinions and feelings.
So look at each scenario then and give the opinion. There's not one set way.
Right, and it's like if the intent is to harm someone, but at the same time, like maybe you call your friend a name to harm him, like you shouldn't go to jail for that.
Yeah.
You should just become a better person and not call people names when you're angry at them, you know? So I feel like it's more on the individuals than the government.
Okay.
All right. We have a large crowd today, so just let's get everybody a chance, and then we'll circle back if anyone has any double questions. Any other questions? Come on up, Jello.
This one is for the pro team. I said, if there should be no additions to the First Amendment in regards to free speech, do you believe that the consequences for violating this amendment in our new digital world should be handled the same way, or will the punishments stay the same for the new forms of violation?
So, do you...
the newer ways that someone can break this law, as in like doing it on social media or pictures, or you know what I mean, like things that just couldn't happen at the time that the amendment was written.
Okay, so like threatening someone over social media or whatever.
Do you think it should be like
pictures?
a larger punishment or a different punishment than what it would be if someone was to do it in person or something like that?
I think it would be the same.
Yeah.
I think it should be the same. If there's like substantial evidence that they're doing, that they're actually threatening someone, and it can be found out that they were going to like do something to the person, I feel like that's the same thing. I mean, it really depends on the situation and how much like proof is behind it, I guess. You know, because sometimes people just say things on social media, but they don't mean anything. Yeah, which makes it harder to establish what's like true and what's not. But
do you guys have any additions to that? Do you guys think?
Would you mind repeat that question one more time?
I asked them because you guys believe that there should be limitations on the on the First Amendment and free speech, or additions to it. So do you guys think that the new forms and the new ways that this could be violated, do you think there should be different ways of handling it, like different forms of punishment?
Yeah, I definitely think, like, what you say on social media, you should definitely be able to hold accountable for it, but it kind of goes to the thing that Leah said, like, there's people just say, like, random stuff on social media all the time, like, you can call them trolling or whatever, so, like, I think if they have, like, intent behind what they're saying, I think that definitely should be, like, policed and, like, held accountable, but, like, if they're just, like, saying random stuff on social media, I don't think you can just, like, sift through every single post people are making to, like, hold them accountable for every single post.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys. You guys did really well.
All right. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Come on up, Sabrina.
Okay, so I think my question would be like, so I get the whole hate speech thing. So say one person created a Facebook page that was like anti-gay people, just all like and it started to grow bigger and bigger, and more people started to join the page, and they just continued throughout the page to slander gay people. And then eventually through that page and through the slander, they started to become violent. So at what point would you consider what stops being hate speech and what starts to ensue violence? Because if there's no stop on the hate speech, then the violence will just come from that almost. So where would you draw that line in the sand? I guess this is from both teams.
Exactly. I feel like I would draw the line, like you're saying, like be violent, like towards like in person and like doing.
Yeah,
more,
like so say they all met, they just like publicly posted on Facebook, and they all met each other through that, and then through that they decided they were going to go out and just like start like beating up random gay people on the streets. So, like where would that obviously that hate speech kind of led to the act of violence. So at what point, where would you stop that so the violence never kind of occurred, or would you let it go and then the violence just comes out of it?
I think ideally it would be stopped like on social media once like the group started to gain like a bigger following. Ideally, I think the social media platform would like take down that group. I think that would be the most like appropriate way to try to, you know, like remedy the situation before it gets out of hand and before like people start being attacked like in public.
Right, but like say they met through the page, they met privately, and then this ensued. So like they obviously posted this all on Facebook. So I guess this is more for you guys. So like where would you draw the line in that stand? Like so they met through Facebook, they posted this publicly, all of this information, they made this page, which is obviously like our First Amendment right is to meet and like freedom of assembly and whatnot. So where would you draw the line in the sand that eventually would lead up to these things? If that makes any sense.
I'm a little bit confused about the question. It's like, well, if they are being violated, like, how do you say violated? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. If they are being like rude with someone else in social media, well, Facebook is a private, like, social media,
right?
Like
it could just be any platform or just like
but if you are spreading like rude comments to another person in a application, for example, or in a space that someone have like a right to, I don't know how to explain this. They have rules in that, as for example Facebook. Like if you pass that limit in that application, I don't know how to. I'm sorry.
Like Facebook can shut you down.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
If,
I think that will be the limit, but for Facebook, it's like, but everyone can have the right to, you know, just.
Right. Like it's not the government's job. It's kind of Facebook's job or Instagram's job or whatever the platform's job.
Yeah.
Like because that's like a private. I mean, even though it's being posted publicly, and I mean. To add to that, I would also say like it should just always be discouraged. but I don't think it's necessarily like the government's job unless there are actual threats. Like if they're saying, let's meet up and let's go beat up gay people, then somebody can call the police because they're like, oh, they're going to go out here and be violent to people, you know. Then the government can get involved through the police. But I think before that, it's the platform's job, and it's just people's job to be decent and not, like, that's kind of, like, and that's a very, like, broad thing to ask, but, like, that people just not be hateful and not threaten other people. But once they actually start threatening, then the government should get involved. Does that answer your question?
Anything else you all wanted to add? Or you're all set?
I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sabrina. Question? Come on up and listen, and then we'll have Patrick. We have time for 2 more.
Okay. I just have, I have one question for both sides, essentially. So do you feel like any changes should be made or could be made when it comes to the First Amendment and employees of private businesses? As of now, the First Amendment offers no protection for employees. Like employers can discipline speech if it's already not covered by another amendment. So I guess it kind of plays off of Sabrina's question a little bit. Do you think any alterations should be made? Anybody feel it?
I didn't think about that part of it.
That's okay.
I feel like, actually, the employers, I feel like it should include employers, and I just kind of always assumed it did, but I guess it doesn't actually legally, like, include employers to, like, treat their employees that way. But, I mean, I feel like that the wording, it's just, like, for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's expected that everyone give other people these rights, you know, like they have their right to this. So I feel like employers who don't do that aren't following the First Amendment, but then it's hard because it is their private business.
Correct, yeah.
So I think maybe if there was, yeah, maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, you're saying like that the employees, they should have like the right, you're saying?
Yeah, like, First Amendment rights under, like, yes, correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it could be specified because, like, I think a lot of times you see instances where, like, employers will try to, like, suppress what employees can't say, and, like, you know, that kind of gets into the, like, unions and all that stuff where, like, employees, like, speaking up and, like, saying stuff. I definitely think they should be protected because I think a lot of times, like, you have employers who kind of just try to, like, suppress their employees and try to keep them, like under their thumb, you know what I mean? So I definitely think that employees should be protected.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for doing a great job.
Thank you.
Come on up, Patrick. Final question here.
All right, hey. So it's kind of a two-parter, but I'll try to make it quick. Do you believe that the right to free speech that comes from either the government or from God? And if you choose the government, what safeguard is there for free speech? And if you say that the right for free speech comes from God, who are we as mortals to make any amendment to that?
So I think the religion question we could reframe only because everyone doesn't look at religion in the same way. So we could focus on the first part of that question.
Yeah.
So when you say like, how should it be safeguarded, like what exactly do you mean?
Well, if we get our rights directly from a government, then why, like, what would be there to stop a government from taking away said rights?
I mean, I guess, like, in theory, if the government wanted to take our rights away, I mean, like, that goes against everything, like, in the Constitution and stuff, so I guess unless you're just, like, throwing the Constitution away at that point. I think the Constitution kind of, like, keeps that from happening.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the Constitution is the main thing keeping that, which obviously we know many politicians literally don't care about the Constitution. So honestly, I would say really nothing, because to lots of people, the Constitution is just a piece of outdated paper. To that I would just say, like, I feel like morality and I feel like our rights are given by God. And so I feel like if people don't believe that, or believe that people just have intrinsic value and intrinsic rights, then the morality can go down, and then there's nothing really stopping the government from taking away your rights.
Thank you very much. Great debate, guys.
All right, everyone. That concludes our ethical debates of the fall 2021 semester. Let's give it up one more time for everybody. Woo! Wonderful, wonderful job. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. It has been a pleasure. Great job on all sides. Again, that concludes our debates for this fall semester. See you all next semester.